What happens when the head of the Catholic Church lifts a pint of Guinness in Rome? Could St. Patrick's legacy find new life under Pope Leo XIV's watch? And what does Irish stew have to do with the Church's mission in a modern world? In the heart of Rome, under the golden dome of St. Peter's, an unexpected aroma wafts through the air. Slow-simmered Irish stew, seasoned with thyme and carrots, and the unmistakable scent of Guinness being poured with care. It's March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, and this year Pope Leo XIV has chosen to mark the feast in a way few could have anticipated. St. Patrick's Day is often associated with parades, pubs, green attire, and Irish pride. But behind the cultural pageantry lies the story of a saint who changed a nation. Patrick, born in Roman Britain, was kidnapped as a boy and enslaved in Ireland. After years of suffering, he escaped, but chose to return to the land of his captors to proclaim the gospel. He baptized thousands, built churches, and laid the foundation for a Catholic culture that would endure for centuries. In that spirit of mission and mercy, Pope Leo XIV has revived an old custom in a new context, honoring cultural Catholicism not as folklore, but as evangelization incarnate. This year's St. Patrick's celebration began with a Mass in the Irish College of Rome, where the Pope spoke movingly of Ireland's missionary legacy. From St. Columbanus to the famine-era priests who brought the faith across oceans. Then came something unexpected. After the liturgy, the Pope joined clergy, seminarians, and lay pilgrims for a traditional Irish lunch. Cameras captured the moment as Leo XIV, clad in white cassock and papal mozzetta, lifted a pint of Guinness with a smile and blessed the meal. To the faith that came by sea, and to the joy that keeps it alive. For some, the moment was disarming. For others, deeply moving. In a world where faith can often feel dour or distant, here was the Pope celebrating with joy and sincerity. The image of the Bishop of Rome breaking brown soda bread, laughing with pilgrims and sampling Irish stew became an instant sensation, shared across social media and Irish diaspora networks worldwide. Yet this was more than a photo op. Vatican sources revealed that the Pope specifically requested this meal, not as a cultural gimmick, but as a gesture of affection for the Irish Church, which has suffered much in recent decades. Scandals, secularism, and declining vocations have wounded the once mighty faith of Ireland. But Pope Leo believes in resurrection, not nostalgia. By embracing a feast marked by joy, fellowship, and tradition, he sent a clear message. Catholic identity is not only about solemnity, it is also about celebration. The saints are not only remembered in statues and litanies, they live on in recipes, music, language, and stories passed from generation to generation. The menu itself reflected that heritage. The Guinness was served in moderation, paired with hearty Irish stew rich in beef, potatoes, and root vegetables. Dessert featured apple tart with custard, and for those avoiding alcohol, mugs of strong black Irish tea were available. Each table featured shamrocks, candles, and handwritten cards bearing St. Patrick's breastplate prayer. In his brief after-lunch remarks, Pope Leo XIV touched on a profound theme: hospitality as evangelization. When we break bread with one another, we share not just food, but faith. Culture becomes catechesis when it is lived with gratitude. That single sentence captured the deeper meaning behind the day's joy. St. Patrick's Day, stripped of commercialism and cliché, is a reminder that faith spreads not only through sermons, but through stories, customs, and welcome. As the Irish musicians played softly in the background and young seminarians swapped stories with visiting pilgrims, there was a palpable sense that this wasn't just a celebration of heritage, it was a vision for the Church. A Church that is joyful without being superficial, rooted without being rigid, and Catholic in the truest, most universal sense. What began as a festive lunch became, in its own quiet way, an act of evangelization. The Pope didn't need to issue an encyclical or hold a press conference. He just needed to sit down at a table, share a meal, and bless a people long devoted to the faith. In that moment, culture and church were not at odds. They were united at the table. In the hours that followed the papal lunch, Rome buzzed with quiet excitement. Local Roman news outlets reported on the Pope's celebration, highlighting both its warm informality and its deeper cultural resonance. Irish expats living in Italy gathered near the Irish college, singing hymns and folk songs, lighting candles and praying for their homeland. The Irish tricolour fluttered alongside the papal flag, a visual expression of communion between nation and church. Inside Vatican corridors, reactions were equally thoughtful. One cardinal reportedly remarked, "The Holy Father didn't just lift a pint, he lifted a people." For a church that often finds itself caught between ideological polemics, such a moment of human connection was profoundly disarming. Pope Leo XIV had not changed doctrine, revised canon law, or launched a liturgical reform. He had simply affirmed, with a plate and a prayer, the dignity of Catholic culture. Across the ocean, news of the Pope's celebration reached Irish communities in the United States, Canada, Australia, and beyond. In Boston, Chicago, and New York, parish priests shared video clips during Sunday Mass announcements. Catholic schools played the Pope's speech to students, inviting them to reflect on what it means to be both faithful and joyful. On Irish radio and in diocesan newsletters, the theme was the same. The Church has not forgotten Ireland, and Ireland's Catholic spirit has not been lost. But this celebration also raised important conversations. Could the Pope's example spark a wider renewal of cultural Catholicism? Could feasts, traditions, and national saints be reawakened in parishes where identity feels thin and engagement is low? The answer for many seems to be yes. Already, priests from as far as the Philippines and Argentina have begun planning similar celebrations around their own national patrons, not merely as parties, but as catechetical events. In fact, several bishops have quietly taken note of what some are calling Leo's model, a vision of evangelization rooted not just in preaching and policy, but in joy. At its core, the Pope's celebration embodies three pillars: sacrament, story, and supper. First, the Eucharist, the foundation of Catholic identity. Second, the saint's legacy, telling stories that connect people to mission. And third, the shared table, where the faithful gather not only to eat, but to belong. None of this would be possible without intentional preparation. Vatican staff shared that the Pope personally requested traditional Irish dishes weeks in advance. Special ingredients were imported, including Irish lamb and cheddar, and a team of chefs collaborated with seminarians from the Irish College to prepare authentic meals. Even the choice of music, featuring harp, fiddle, and a rendition of "Be Thou My Vision," was made to reflect the day's sacred tone. But it wasn't all sentimentality. During the meal, Pope Leo XIV reportedly engaged in serious conversations about vocations, emigration, and the role of the laity in rebuilding faith in Ireland. He asked pointed questions about youth ministry and Catholic education, taking notes and listening attentively to each guest. While cameras captured smiles and raised glasses, what they didn't show was just as important: a Pope at work, pastorally and personally. This blend of celebration and substance is what many say sets Leo XIV apart. He is neither aloof nor performative. Instead, he embodies a kind of incarnational leadership, one that understands that joy is not a distraction from the gospel, but a vehicle for it. By affirming a feast like St. Patrick's Day, he points the Church not backward to nostalgia, but forward to a culture of witness rooted in beauty, memory, and faith. Already there are whispers that next year may include similar celebrations for other culturally rich Catholic traditions: Our Lady of Guadalupe in December, St. Thankan, Joseph's Day in March, and even Vietnamese Martyrs' Day in November. The vision is simple yet profound: meet people where they are, affirm the sanctity of their stories, and sanctify culture through Christ. Pope Leo XIV's St. Patrick's Day in Rome will be remembered not just for Guinness and stew, but for the reawakening of a truth long buried beneath bureaucratic formality. The Catholic faith is lived not only in documents and doctrines, but in kitchens, songs, and stories shared around the table. The Church evangelizes not only from the pulpit, but from the plate. And as the sun set over the eternal city, the laughter that lingered in the Vatican's courtyard echoed something ancient yet ever new. A church alive in joy, in memory, and in mission. As evening descended over Rome, the Irish college courtyard was still alive with the quiet hum of conversation. Seminarians and visitors lingered over cups of tea and laughter, while soft Irish melodies played from a string trio tucked into one corner. But the moment that truly defined the day came as Pope Leo XIV returned once more, not to give a speech, but to sit beside a young seminarian and listen. This simple gesture, an 87-year-old pontiff sitting at eye level with someone decades younger, embodied the heart of the day's meaning. It was not about spectacle or symbolism. It was about presence. And through that presence, the Pope signaled something powerful. That the Church's future is built not only on theological precision or administrative strength, but on authentic relationships formed at the table of Christ. Throughout Church history, saints and missionaries have used meals, music, and memory as tools for evangelization. From the early Christians who shared the agape feast, to St. Patrick himself who adapted local customs to teach the Trinity, food and festivity have always served as pathways into deeper truth. Pope Leo's revival of this dynamic is not a novelty, it is a retrieval of something ancient. In fact, those closest to the Pope say this moment has been years in the making. His time as a young priest was filled with encounters in working-class kitchens, community halls, and modest parishes. He learned early that people remember joy far more vividly than arguments, and that an invitation to a meal often does more than a formal invitation to a seminar. It is this pastoral instinct that shaped the St. Patrick's Day celebration. Not merely honoring a culture, but honoring the way culture forms people, and the way the gospel speaks most clearly when embodied. For Pope Leo, it's not enough for Catholics to know their faith. They must also love it, live it, and share it. And culture, especially when it carries centuries of Christian memory, becomes the canvas on which that faith is painted. Irish culture in particular offers a vivid palette. Hospitality, storytelling, song, and resilience are not just national traits, they're deeply biblical ones. In lifting a pint and blessing a pot of stew, the Pope wasn't endorsing a caricature of Irishness. He was blessing the heart of it, the part that still longs for God even in a secular world. Many noted how seamlessly sacred and joyful elements blended during the celebration. The gospel proclaimed earlier at Mass was echoed in the meal, a call to return, to rejoice, to remember. As guests recited the breastplate of St. Patrick before dessert, a sense of reverence filled the air, not forced, but natural. For a moment it felt like the early church again, prayer and table, memory and mission. The impact of this event has already begun to ripple outward. Parish leaders across Europe and North America have contacted the Irish College asking for ideas on how to reclaim cultural feasts in ways that are both faithful and festive. Diocesan offices are exploring how to incorporate music, traditional foods, and family rituals into catechesis. Even secular journalists, often cynical about church affairs, describe the Pope's actions as disarmingly human. Perhaps that's the secret. Amid debates on doctrine, discipline, and direction, Pope Leo XIV chose to be profoundly human, and in doing so, profoundly papal. His example calls bishops, priests, and lay Catholics alike to rediscover the missionary power of joy, especially through the rhythms of cultural celebration rooted in Christ. As the evening in Rome came to a close, a small group remained, singing hymns around a fire in the courtyard. A bishop from Armagh whispered to a priest beside him, "I haven't felt this kind of hope in years." That hope wasn't theoretical. It was served on plates, poured into cups, sung in verse, and shared under the stars. And perhaps that's the real miracle of Pope Leo's St. Patrick's Day in Rome. Not that it broke headlines, but that it rekindled hearts. Not through grand gestures, but through the sacred simplicity of stew, song, and a shepherd's presence. The next morning, reflections from the event continued to spread across Catholic media, diocesan bulletins, and social platforms. Commentators praised Pope Leo XIV's pastoral imagination, his ability to see beyond ritual and regulation to the heart of Catholic life. The phrase, Guinness and grace, began trending in Catholic circles, not as a meme, but as a metaphor for something the Church has long yearned to reclaim, a faith that is incarnate, joyful, and deeply rooted in everyday beauty. At the Vatican's daily press briefing, a spokesperson confirmed that the event had been entirely the Pope's idea. His Holiness wanted to honor the Irish people, the statement read, not only with words, but with presence, recognizing their faith, their wounds, and their contribution to the Church Universal. The spokesperson added that similar cultural expressions are being considered for other feast days around the year. Reactions from Ireland were particularly moving. Bishops issued statements of gratitude, parishes held vigils in thanksgiving, and countless Irish Catholics took to social media to say how seen and valued they felt. "We've taken some bruises as a church," one priest tweeted, "but yesterday we remembered that we're still loved." In a country that has endured scandal, decline, and secularization, this papal embrace felt like balm on old wounds. And yet, the beauty of the celebration lay not only in its cultural specificity, it pointed to something universal. It reminded Catholics everywhere that holiness is not limited to churches and chapels. It can be found in kitchens, gardens, and feast day tables. That bread, when broken in charity, becomes a prelude to Eucharist. That joy, when rooted in Christ, is evangelization. This insight is not new. Saints across centuries have affirmed it. Saint Philip Neri taught his disciples to laugh and dance as expressions of love for God. Saint Josemaria Escrivá said ordinary life is the path to sanctity. But in an age increasingly fragmented and digital, when human connection is too often mediated by screens, Pope Leo XIV's feast showed what incarnate faith looks like. It smells like stew, it sounds like laughter, and it always includes someone new at the table. In fact, among the guests at the papal celebration were several asylum seekers from Irish missions in North Africa. They had been invited by a religious sister who works with migrants and wanted them to experience a sense of belonging. One of them, a young man from Sudan, later said, "I didn't understand the language, but I understood the welcome." That is the kind of witness that no theological treatise can replace. Plans are already underway to publish a special booklet documenting the day. Recipes, prayers, photos, reflections. The Vatican hopes it will inspire parishes around the world to use feast days not just for liturgy, but for celebration. Holy, intentional, joy-filled. The goal isn't nostalgia, it's renewal. And Pope Leo XIV knows that renewal doesn't happen in abstract programs. It happens in the personal, through meals shared, hands held, and moments that draw heaven and earth a little closer. That's why this celebration mattered. It didn't try to solve every problem in the church. It simply reminded her of who she is, a family, gathered around a table, telling sacred stories, and waiting in joyful hope. As Lent continued across the Catholic world, Pope Leo XIV's St. Patrick's Day gathering stood out as a radiant interruption, a reminder that joy and penance are not enemies, but companions. The celebration became a kind of icon, not of excess, but of incarnation, not of distraction, but of delight rooted in devotion. It prompted many to reflect on the place of festivity in a faith often reduced to rules. The theological underpinning for such reflection is deep. In the Christian imagination, feasting is not accidental, it is covenantal. From Abraham hosting angels under the oak tree, to Jesus at Cana, to the Eucharistic table at the heart of Christian life, God reveals himself in hospitality. Pope Leo, by reclaiming a cultural feast in the Vatican, simply lived what theology already teaches, that to sit, share and celebrate can be sacramental when done in love. For those working in evangelization, the message could not have come at a better time. In dioceses struggling with parish closures, declining mass attendance and religious indifference, Pope Leo's pastoral approach offered a new blueprint. Not a retreat into culture wars, nor an abandonment of doctrine, but a humble human witness, where evangelization begins with encounter and joy. Several diocesan offices immediately began adapting the Leo model to their local contexts. In South Korea, a bishop announced plans for a St. Andrew Kim feast with traditional Korean food and music. In Nigeria, parishes discussed integrating native drumming and dress into upcoming liturgical celebrations. And in Canada, plans for a bilingual St. John de Brébeuf festival began to circulate. These aren't gimmicks, they are the embodiment of the incarnation. When Jesus took flesh, he didn't float above culture. He entered it, redeemed it, and elevated it. Pope Leo's St. Patrick's Day in Rome reminded the world that holiness doesn't evacuate culture, it transfigures it. Back in Rome, the ripple effects could be seen even among those not present. Young seminarians spoke of the Pope's example as liberating, a call to be joyful, accessible, and authentic in their future ministry. He taught us that loving souls means loving their stories, their songs, even their recipes, one seminarian wrote. The gospel can travel through laughter and Guinness as long as Christ is at the center. This balance of reverence and relationality may define Pope Leo XIV's legacy. Critics have long warned of a church divided between rigid traditionalism and rootless modernity. What the Pope offered instead was a synthesis, a Catholicism rooted in memory, open to beauty, and confident enough to smile. Notably, no theology was diluted. The Mass remained the center of the day. The readings focused on evangelization. The prayers invoked the communion of saints. And yet, by the time the stew was served and the last fiddle note faded, those present felt that they had experienced something sacred, a glimpse of what church could be at its best. Home, hearth, and heaven all intertwined. In years to come, many will forget the exact words of the Pope's toast or what songs were played, but they will remember how they felt, seen, fed, welcomed, blessed. And in a time when alienation runs deep, such memory is not sentimentality, it is salvation. As the final echoes of Irish hymns faded and Rome settled back into its Lenten rhythm, the memory of Pope Leo XIV's St. Patrick's Day feast continued to stir hearts far beyond Vatican walls. What was meant as a simple, sincere gesture had become something of a cultural and spiritual spark, igniting not only conversations but conversions of vision. The event reminded the Church that evangelization is not only a mission, it is a mood, a tone, a way of being that embraces both the sacred and the celebratory. From diocesan offices to youth groups, from senior religious to lay ministers, Catholics across the globe began revisiting how they mark feast days. No longer just dates on a calendar or titles of obligation, these days were being reimagined as chances to encounter God through the richness of real life, music, memory, and shared meals. Inspired by the Pope's witness, parishes began planning liturgical feasts with both depth and delight. But the deeper resonance of the celebration was this. Pope Leo XIV reminded the faithful that Catholic culture isn't merely about preserving the past, it's about transmitting joy. The Guinness and stew were not ends in themselves, they were sacraments of belonging. They carried within them centuries of migration, struggle, sanctity, and song. And when blessed, they became part of the Church's living proclamation. Christ is alive, and he meets us not only at the altar, but also at the table. In a world that increasingly flattens tradition into kitsch or dismisses it as irrelevant, the Pope showed that Catholic culture, when lived with authenticity and reverence, still has the power to captivate. Not through force or fear, but through a humble joy, that welcomes everyone, from seasoned theologians to skeptical visitors, to sit down, eat, and remember. Pope Leo's actions also offered a pastoral lesson. For pastors and parish leaders wondering how to draw people back to the church, especially in a post-pandemic world marked by fatigue and fragmentation, the message was clear. People are drawn not first to programs or policies, but to presence. A church that listens, laughs, and lives its faith joyfully will always attract those longing for home. And so, as the Irish College tidied up its courtyard and the final pots were washed, something deeper had been planted. A seed of renewal through celebration. A reminder that the saints are not distant marble figures, but living friends. That holiness can rise with the smell of stew, and that the church, in all her wisdom, must never forget how to rejoice. If you found this reflection meaningful, make sure to follow Think Fresh Daily for more insight into how faith, culture, and everyday life meet in today's church. We're here to bring you the stories behind the scenes, the gestures that evangelize, the beauty that inspires, and the joy that renews. Subscribe, share, and stay with us for more episodes exploring how Catholic tradition stays alive, not in silence alone, but in the songs, meals, and moments that bring us together. Because sometimes the most powerful theology is served in a bowl, toasted in a glass, and shared in a story.